The mud clutched my ankles like cold hands, and the geese hissed so near my shins that I felt the brush of their breath through my stockings. I drove them with a willow switch, clicking my tongue as my mother did, and the flock waddled in a flurry of white and brown webbed feet slapping, wings rattling like rain on thatch. The air smelled of wet earth and ash from last night's fire. My fingers burned where the bucket handle had rubbed them raw. My breath paid small ghosts in the morning chill. Beyond the pen, smoke climbed straight from the cottages, thin grey threads stitching sky to roof. I was 12 that spring, though I only knew it because Father had scratched a notch in the doorbeam at Candlemas and said I had grown too long for last year's tunic. Years mattered little in our lanes. We were counted by tasks, not numbers. I could carry 2 small pails from the well without spilling, could fetch the dairy cow if she strayed toward the Lord's grove, could pull stones from the furrows and stack them neat, could shout until crows fled like sin at the priest's glance. The world was fields and hearth, bell and weather, and the way Mother's hand found the back of my neck when she wanted my attention. We were 5 in the cottage, Father who smelled of earth and horses, Mother whose hair kept the smoke scent no matter how often she washed it with ash water, my sister Joan, 2 years younger than I, and fleet as a hare, my brother Rob, barely 5 and always sticky with honey, if he could steal it, and me. There was also the hen who believed she owned the hearth, and a cat that believed it owned the hen. Our cottage was wattle and daub, with a low door one had to bow to pass, and a roof that let in winter stars if you knew where to look. Rushes lay on the floor, sweet when they were fresh and sour when they were not. The hearth was our middle and our sun. Mother kept a pot there that never quite emptied, broth and barley and greens drawn forever from the same dark well of flavour. Morning began with prime, the church bell thudding the mist like a heart. Father pushed open the door and tested the sky with narrowed eyes, reading weather from a swatch of cloud. He was kind when he was not tired, and stern when he was. And mostly he was tired. Up, he said, and Joan and I were already up, for he spoke to the air when he spoke to the children. We ate coarse bread from yesterday, dipped in ale that was small and sour and safer than well water after a hard rain. The bread scratched the throat. I liked it for that, for it made me feel older to swallow something rough. The lane smelled of dung and damp moss. Ducks complained at the pond where ice had broken into knives the week before, and drifted now in dark, delicate bones. The blacksmith's hammer rang across the morning. Each blow a spark you could hear. The woman nearby shook her rug, and the dust leapt into sun like gnats. From a distant fold a sheep bleated 3 times, then fell still. We worked before the day had the strength to warm itself. Father to the open fields, to see to the oxen and the plough. Mother to the washing and the dough. Joan to the dairy, pale fingers learning patience from curds. Me to the geese with my willow switch. And then to water, then to the kitchen garden where the soil made its own damp music under the hoe. There was always a list, though I never saw it written. It lived in Mother's mind, a rosary of chores she thumbed world without end. When we did well, she hummed a psalm without words. When we did poorly, the humming stopped. She wore a gown of wool, the sleeves tied with cords where they were too long, and a linen veil that had once been white. I wore a tunic that smelled of lanolin and smoke, a belt of twisted cord, and stockings laced above the knee. Shoes were for holy days or frost. I felt the village better with bare feet, the way the lane rose under the ball, and the way the door sill bit against my heel. The world spoke through the ground if you let it. There were small joys, quick as nests collected and hidden. We played at mails, scratching the board with a firebrand on a flat plank and moving pebbles like kings and soldiers. We fought with sticks against bramble giants and came home with arms striped blood red and proud of it. On the Lord's meadow, when we were bold and no reeve watched, we ran with hopes and chased the wind like the younger geese. Joan and I had a way of telling stories together, she in whispers, I in shouts, until Mother told us the saints tired of our noise. When Father laughed, it sounded like a cough that had decided to be kind. Hunger came often, like a neighbour who never waited to be invited. We ate pottage stretched thin, leeks, peas, if they lasted in the sack, a bone boiled so long it had forgotten it had ever been marrow. On good days there was cheese, yellow and sharp. On feast days, pork salted with such care that its taste carried the summer smoke with it like a memory. The bread was mostly rye and sometimes barley. Father said wheat was for the Lord's table, but once when the miller's wife owed Mother a favour, she brought us a small loaf of fine white, and we tore it like angels in a story. We children learned our prayers in Latin. We did not understand. Pater Noster, we said, and Father Martin nodded with his heavy-lidded eyes, and I liked the roundness of the sound in my mouth. He told us of saints with names like bells and of hell, where fire never slept. Sometimes he placed a hand on my head and said I had a good voice and should sing louder at Mass. When he did it, I felt taller, as if the rafters bent to make room. The church was cool even in midsummer, and smelled of beeswax when someone had been generous. Of tallow otherwise, there was a painted Mary with a fading mantle of blue. I loved her face when the candlelight trembled. She seemed to breathe with us, her wooden breast rising and falling with the bellows of our lungs. Most days, however, church was far and field was near. The manor's open fields ran like cloth strips, each furrow narrow and long, each strip part of someone's livelihood, our own held by father in Villimage. Like all our kind, from the ridge, you could see the whole village. A clutch of roofs, a curl of smoke, the sharp prickle of the church spire against the sky. The oxen's yokes creaked, leather talking to wood in a language of old patience. When I walked behind the harrow, stones leapt at my shins, and I swore under my breath the way father did, though softer, for if mother heard me she would pass her palm across my mouth and tell me words shape fates. The reeve, Walter, had eyes that counted. He counted our hens with his eyes, and our children, and the strides between our strips, and the days we had given to the Lord's demners, and the days we owed. He carried a tally stick, and a short whip. He rarely used, for he did not have to, his mouth did the work of the whip. "Your father is late," he said to me once, when the oxen were already in the field, and a cloud like a ram's fleece had just eaten the sun. I did not answer, for children had no speech with reeves, but I felt the words sit in my chest like stones, and that night I did not sleep, for fear father would be blamed for the weather. Yet, even Walter laughed when the ale was new. On Sundays after Mass, men gathered in the yard outside the alehouse, and drank from a common pitcher while their wives kept their eyes modest and their ears open. Stories ran like water. Someone always knew a man in the next village who had seen a wolf, or a shade walking, or a fish with a head like a monk's. We stood at the edges like nettles, stinging to be noticed. If a man gave me the last heel of his loaf or a lick of honey from his thumb, I felt fortunate for a week. Sickness came and went without warning, like a storm that had forgotten its road. Joan caught a cough that winter, and the wheeze of it cut my sleep into ragged pieces. Mother burned rosemary and muttered a charm her own mother had sworn was only an herb recipe, and not a charm at all. Father Martin came to bless the doorway and spoke softly, the Latin melting into the smoke. Joan lived, and the day her cough died, birds returned to the hedges as if they had been listening carefully and had waited for the right sentence to end. We learnt the names of days by their work. Lammas tasted of new bread. Michaelmas smelled of goose fat and nutshells. Candlemas glittered with flames and made the inside of the church look like the sky. Between such islands lay seas of sameness. Fetch wood, fetch water, pull weeds, mend fence, mend shirt, mend patience. I learned to set snares for rabbits, and to cup a trout from the brook by thinking like a stone. When I smashed my thumb under the cartwheel, Mother wound wool around the nail and told me to chew the pain down. I did, and I learned I could swallow more than I had thought. There were rules I did not understand, but obeyed, because Father obeyed. Do not take fallen wood from the Lord's grove, though it lay there asking. Do not sow on the saint's feast, even if the sky is perfect and the ground keeps its promises. Do not offend the miller, for all grain goes through his teeth and comes out dearer. Do not look directly at the steward, but bend a little at the waist, as if listening to the land. The land was the only Lord we both feared and loved, and it had a long memory. I could feel it sometimes under my soles, a pulse like my own. In the evenings when work waned, we sat around the hearth, and the pot sang softly to itself, and the rushlight spat a sweet smoke, Father told us of his own boyhood, of a winter so deep the well froze to its heart, and you could walk across it without thinking, of a spring flood that carried a pig clean through the orchard and left it in the churchyard as if it were making confession of the year the Lord's daughter married, and every house was taxed with a handful of grain. For a bride's favour is heavy and must be carried by the village. When he spoke of his father's father, his face turned like a field under wind, both the same and not the same. I lay on my rush mat and watched the rafters hold the smoke like a net of darker shadow. The cat padded over the thatch above me. Its weight made a small sound like a secret. Outside, the night breathed. Sometimes a fox cried, or a cow lowed, or an owl hooted with a question that had no answer in our human tongue. I loved that sound, because it promised mystery beyond the next day's work, even if I could never touch it. We children had our hierarchies as sure as the men did. I was near the top of the middle, strong enough to pull a stubborn gate, not yet strong enough to break the ice on the pond with one blow of a branch. The older boys wrestled and bled and laughed in the same breath. The younger ones trailed us and learned disdain and allegiance from our careless hands. There was a boy called Tom who could whistle like a lark and steal pears without looking at the tree. There was another called Will who feared bees but would stick his arm into any thorn bush for a cricket. Tom and I fought once over a clay marble, and afterward we shared it and invented a game whose rules we changed whenever one of us began to lose. If I had a treasury, it was kept in an old shoe under the bedboard, a boar's tusk polished smooth as riverstone, a small iron nail bent into a letter. I pretended spelled my name, a bit of blue cloth Joan had torn from the church banner when she was too young to know better, a hard clump of salt that had fallen from Father's pocket the day he came back from market. When I pulled them up and spread them on the floor, I felt as rich as the Lord, though I had never seen his hoard and never would. Richness to me was weight made visible. Sometimes, though, the air carried a different weight. Men bent closer over their ale and spoke low. Mother tied her veil tighter under her chin. Father stared at his hands as if they had lied to him. I heard words I did not know, thick as gruel. Aid, tallage, levy. I heard others I knew too well. Owed, due, taken. The reeve's mouth pinched tight. The miller smiled more and showed less tooth. The road that ran past the village seemed to lean nearer, as if it were listening. It was an evening like that, when the church bell rang once, slow and heavy, outside the pattern of prayer. The note struck and hung, and the village held its breath. I stood in the yard with a yoke across my shoulders and pails that had not yet felt the wells cold, and I felt the sound land inside my chest and lodge there. Mother's hands were white with flour. She wiped them on her apron and exchanged a look with Father that made my back stiff. He set down the flail so gently that the straw under it did not stir. From the lane came the clink of harness, the muffled thud of hooves, a man's voice swallowed by distance. A pair of dogs started up near the alehouse and then fell quiet, as if scolded by a whisper. Father stepped to the edge of the yard and peered toward the bend, where the hawthorn grew thick. I wanted to run there and see, but Mother's hand found my sleeve, 2 fingers only, and that was enough to root me to the spot. Inside, she said, though it was not yet full dark. Her voice carried no fear, only a careful stillness, like a spoon set down beside a bowl. Joan gathered Rob as if he were smaller than he was, which made him protest and then grow silent at the look she gave him. Father did not move. The bell's note thinned at last and vanished into the hedges. In the brief hollow it left, I heard another sound, the tally stick tapping against leather, the sound the reeve made when he wished to be heard without being seen. Walter appeared at the bend, his cap dew dark, his eyes like the wet stones of the brook. Behind him came 2 men on small horses, their cloaks plain but too fine for our lanes, their boots with spurs that winked like bits of sun at the edge of water. Between them rode a 3rd man with a satchel and a board across his lap. Though he was not a priest or a peddler, they were still small, still at a distance, yet the air around our cottage tightened as if the rafters had shifted and the roof hung too low. Father's shoulders twitched. He picked up the flail again and held it not as a weapon but as a habit. Mother's fingers slipped from my sleeve and found the doorpost instead. The geese in their pen drew close together with small mean murmurs, and I saw their pale eyes glitter, and I thought of how geese warn each other of foxes, how they feel the fox before it shows its teeth. I did not then have the words for what rode toward us. I only knew that our games would not be as they had been tomorrow, and that the bread would be sliced a little thinner, and that father's laugh when it came would end sooner. I felt the village lean toward the lane as if to listen and away from it, as if to avoid being struck. I was 12 that spring, and I thought the sound I heard was leather against saddle, metal against spur, wood against wood. But later, lying awake and counting rafters, I decided it was something else. The quiet, heavy footfall of a change that had already stepped into our yard. The morning after the strangers came riding, the mist lay so low upon the fields that the hedges seemed cut in half, their tops floating like drowned things above a sea of white. The bell had not yet rung prime, yet the men were already in the yard, their boots dark with dew, their horses stamping with impatience. One of them wore a cloak lined with fur, though the day was not so cold, and his voice carried like iron, dragged across stone. He spoke to Walter, our reeve, who nodded often, tapping his tally stick against his thigh. Father stood behind me, his hand heavy on my shoulder. It was not often he held me still that way, and I felt the weight of it as a message. I did not understand the words passing between them. Levy, tithe, tally, but I felt them like stones in the air, each one sharp and dropping. Mother stayed inside, though I knew she watched from the crack of the shutter, flour still on her hands. Joan held Rob in her arms even though he was too heavy now, his legs dangling like sacks of barley. She whispered into his hair until he grew quiet, though I could not hear what she said. The stranger with the fur cloak turned once and looked toward me. His eyes passed over me as if measuring whether I belonged to the earth or to the manor. I felt myself shrink beneath his gaze, though I clenched my jaw as father did, trying to look older, stronger. Yet his glance moved on, to the oxen in the pen, to the small stack of barley still unsent to the mill, to the geese that hissed as if they too knew what kind of men these were. By noon, word had passed through every lane. More work was to be given, more grain demanded. The Lord had new needs. His son soon to be knighted, his house needing repair, his purse needing weight. Each family would give, each child grown tall enough to carry water or swing a flail would be counted in the reckonings. That evening, the village gathered near the alehouse. Men stood with arms folded, women with hands pressed to their aprons. Even the youngest children hushed, sensing the heaviness. Father Martin tried to speak of patience, of obedience, as God's will, but his words fell into silence. The air smelled of ale and damp wool, and I saw the men shift their weight as though the ground beneath them had grown softer, less certain. We children kept near the edges, listening. My friend Tom whispered that he had heard the fur-cloaked man would take boys to train in the castle yard. He said his older brother had been spoken of, that he might leave before Michaelmas. I felt my throat tighten, though I said nothing. I thought of Tom's brother walking away from the village, leaving the smell of the hearth behind, the sound of the bell behind, the soft earth of the lanes. I thought of my own father's hand on my shoulder that morning, how firm it had pressed. The days after grew tense as a rope pulled too tight. Work stretched longer. Father stayed in the fields until the shadows grew long, and the geese called for penning. Mother's voice sharpened when we dallied, though I could see the weariness in her face like lines carved into wood. At night, the whispers by the hearth grew longer. I lay on my rush mat, listening to them trade words I half understood. Grain, levy, duty, boys. The games we played no longer tasted the same. When we wrestled harder, as if proving something. When we played at knights and fools, there was less laughter, more bruises. Joan no longer sang while she worked. Her hands moved quickly, her lips tight. Even Rob grew quiet, as if he felt the strain that pulled through the air like threads on a loom. The reeve came often now, his tally stick like a second shadow. He stood in our yard more than once, watching father at work, counting our hens, tapping the bucket I carried as though to weigh it with his eyes. He spoke less, but his silence was louder than any words. One evening, as I returned from the well, I saw two men ride past on the road, cloaks thick with dust, their faces stern, They bore no lances, but swords hung at their sides. One glanced down at me, and though his eyes did not linger, I felt the same shiver as I had beneath the fur-cloaked man's gaze. I hurried home with the water slopping against my tunic, the chill soaking into my skin. That night the bell rang again. Not for mass, not for feast, but once, heavy and slow. Its echo filled the lanes, and the village stilled as if listening for something behind the sound. Dogs whined, geese shifted in their pen, even the cat crouched low, ears back. I lay awake long after, the rafters above me dark as stone, and wondered what weight had been hung on the rope to make it toll so low. The next morning, Father's face was set like frost. He told me to work harder, to carry twice what I had before. His hand was heavy on my shoulder again, heavier than it had ever been. When I faltered, he said nothing, only looked toward the road. I understood then that something waited on that road, and that it would reach our cottage soon. Children are quick to sense what words do not say. I felt the village holding its breath, each family watching the road, each boy wondering if his name would be called, each girl holding her brother's hand a little tighter. The air itself seemed full of waiting, and still, in the midst of it, life pressed on. The bread baked, the cows lowed, the oxen pulled, the fields drank the rain. Yet beneath every sound, every smell, every sight, lay the same unease. Childhood, which had once been made of laughter and mud and small games, now carried the taste of fear. I did not know then what would come, but I knew that whatever it was drawing nearer, step by step, with the sound of hooves and the weight of men's voices, and that my days of chasing geese barefoot through the mud were numbered. The days that followed moved like oxen, slow, stubborn, heavy with breath, and yet each hour seemed to carry me closer to something I could not name. The road kept its brown ribbon through the hedges, rutted and shining after rain, and I caught myself glancing toward its bend as often as Father did, as if the bend were a mouth that might open and speak my name. When I slept, I dreamed of hooves, and when I woke, the sound of water in the bucket became their echo. The steward came back within the week. Not the fur-cloaked man, but another, lean and fair, with a scar that crossed his lips so that, when he smiled, the smile was two. He wore the Lord's colours, a strip of blue cloth knotted at his shoulder, and his boots were clean for the first 10 strides into our village, and stained for the rest. He did not dismount in the lane. He rode to the churchyard, and let his horse's tail brush the saint's stones. Walter the Reeve assembled us with his stick, tapping at doors, tapping at the edges of skirts, tapping the air when it dared ignore him. We stood in a half circle with the low stone wall at our backs, and the yew tree dark above, and the steward unrolled a strip of parchment and held it with both hands as if it were not paper but a rule that kept the world from breaking. I felt the press of bodies, wool against wool, breath against breath. Jones squeezed my fingers until our knuckles ground. Children were quiet because their mothers told them to be quiet, and because the steward's horse snorted smoke that smelled like iron. Birds tried once to sing and stopped. He read in a voice that was not harsh and for that reason frightened me more. It had the calm of a mill wheel steady, uninterested in the grain it crushed. By the command of Sir Hugh, he said, and the name came down like a lid, covering the murmurs. Sir Hugh held us the way a pot holds water, by his command, because winter winds have torn the manor's hall, because the roof must be mended before Michaelmas, because bridges and fish ponds must be set right, because his son, God keep him, must be made knight and go before his betters with honour. A stir moved through us, like reeds in a breeze, and then settled again. Each holding will give more labour this summer beyond the boon works of hay and harvest. Each man to the Lord's demned sign when called, each woman to spinning or gleaning as bidden. Each household will also give one youth for a term of service in the manor yard, 12 months learning in obedience and skill, stables, kitchens, kennels, what needs doing. Names will be taken by the Reeve, with my witness by Sunday a fortnight from now. Pay heed. God sees who shirks. At the word youth I felt myself step backwards though. My feet did not move. The word had length and rope in it. The men shifted. Some with relief work for their sons meant fewer tallies against their own backs, and some with fear, and most with both. The women's faces sealed like jars. I felt Mother's eyes on me as if she had set her palm full against my chest. Walter called out rules like stones. Who could be chosen, who could be spared? That a widow with only one son might not yield him, that a maimed lad might not be counted. The steward lifted his parchment and rolled it, and dropped it into the satchel at his hip, like any other thing that could be put away. Then he looked at us, not unkindly, and for a breath I saw that he was only a man wearing the shape of our fear. His eyes found Father's among the others, paused and moved on. The pause went into me like a thorn. When the meeting broke, I heard Father's breath before I heard his words. "Come," he said to me, and I followed him to the shadow of the church wall. He did not lean upon it, though his shoulders half-asked. He looked at my face, then at my hands, as if to read there something that parchment might not show him. "You are near tall," he said. "Near enough. The year is long and short, both. A boy learns in a year what a man needs." I waited for my own voice to come. It came small. "Am I to go, Father?" "You will not be called if I can keep it," he said. "But Walter knows our account and will weigh us with that. I will speak to him at the alehouse, and speak again when the bell is drunk into silence, and he will listen, or he will not." He laid his hand on my head and pressed, not blessing, not pushing, only reminding me that his hand covered me for now. Mother said little. She took the lid from the pot and set it aside and let the steam rise as if it had been waiting to escape. Joan looked at me with her mouth half open and then shut it upon a word that might have been my name. Rob tried to crawl beneath my tunic as if I were a tree, and he a rabbit, fearing a hawk. I knelt to him, and he clung close, and his breath was damp and smelled of milk and ash. I thought, the world has hinges I cannot see. Someone is opening one. That week, the steward came and went, the road eating him and giving him back. He measured the bridge by the brook with a string and marked posts with a knife. He stood in the Lord's meadow and watched the wind lie down and stand. He spoke to the forester and to the miller, and to Father Martin, who came out to meet him with a hand raised high as if blessing were protection enough against ledgers. He did not speak children. I might as well have been a hedge. The men argued like geese. Give the year and have done. No. Pay with more oats and keep the boy. No. There are no oats left that the miller will see. He has found a new hole in his sack where grain disappears before we bring it. A year's service is not death. A year's service is the first step into a mouth that never closes. The talk swarmed, bit, flew. I worked because working felt like standing firm on a deck that heaves. If my hands were busy, the world could not throw me as far. I hauled water and made 3 trips when 2 would have done, and scoured the pot with the roughness of my own fear. I turned the earth in the garden and set the carrot plants in soldiers' lines. I mended a hedge with thorns that stitched my skin. My body learned to answer before my mind knew the question. At night I stared at the rafters until my eyes made patterns in their grain. Saints' faces, foxes, a ship I had never seen but that felt true to me, riding out a wind I did not have a name for. Sunday, a fortnight from the churchyard gathering, Walter set his stool in the shade of the yew tree and began to take names. The yew's berries glowed like drops of coals. He sharpened his tally stick with a small knife, shaving curls of wood that fell upon his boots. The steward did not sit. He stood with his arms folded, his scar making the shape of a second mouth. Father had polished his cap, without water. Mother had mended the tear in my sleeve with thread that did not match, and so felt like a flag. He began, with those who offered. Osbert the carter's voice carried. My Oswen is ready to learn the stables. He was a large man, and loved his son and pushed him forward like a gift he could not bear to keep. Others came with their boys by the wrists. Some of the lads stood straight, hungry for the Lord's meat and the smell of horse. Some swayed a little as if the ground had tilted under them. I could not tell which I would have been had Father said my name aloud. Then came those called. The steward looked at Walter's mark beneath each household, and if the mark was dark with debt, he nodded, and Walter spoke, and a name became a shape that stepped forward. A widow lifted her palms and the steward shook his head. The priest touched her shoulder. A man with a broken hand lifted it, as proof, and the steward saw him and saw through him. No boy there, not his own, not his sister's boy, not the neighbour's. Next, The air growled, soft, unhappy. Father had not yet moved. He stood, breathing in through his nose, and his breath made a sound like a slow whetstone. When Walter's eyes came to him, the steward's eyes came with them. I felt Mother's fingers as if she had reached through my ribs to hold my heart. Father spoke first. "We are not behind beyond measure," he said. "I have given days to the dim moon at lambing, and will give more at hay. I have not hidden grain. I have not taken the Lord's wood." He spoke to Walter and to the steward together, both mouths to one ear. "There are marks I cannot help, but there are none I have not earned with my back." Walter's mouth made the shape of a smile, and did not become one. "The marks speak. The hall needs a roof." He tapped his stick against his palm. "Your lad is near tall. We will make it up in oats," Father said. "Or in a pig at Candlemas," Mother said. Surprising me, she had not spoken outside the yard to a man who was not priest in a year. Her voice did not waver. "A piglet, to be fattened by Martimas." The steward turned his head and the scar pulled. "A piglet is a promise whose throat may find the fox," he said, not unkindly. "The hall needs a roof now, and boys are not only boys. They are hands with ears and eyes above them. We need such hands." I felt the meeting tip as a cup tips. Not here, I thought. Not now. Not in the yew's shadow. Perhaps the earth heard me. Perhaps the tree did. Perhaps no one did. I stood very straight and counted my breath, and pretended each one was a stone I put into a pocket in my chest. Walter's stick touched the tally. The household of, he called our name, my father's fathers, the shape by which our cottage was known to the steward's parchment, will give its youth. The word it split me. Not my name. Not even boy. A piece of a holding. A portion. I felt heat go to my face and wished it had gone to my feet instead. To run. Father did not nod. He bowed, just enough to say he had heard and did not refuse. Then he turned from the steward, and Walter to me and to Mother, and to God, and each of us took some of what bowed with him. "Not today," the steward added. 3 days hence, bring your boy to the manor yard at Tierce, with his hands clean and his face washed, and with no more than 1 bundle of clothes. We will feed him. He will sleep with the other lads above the kitchen and learn to keep his tongue between his teeth." Mother's hands had not left my chest, though they lay only in her apron. I felt them there, and they kept me upright. Father put his knuckles on my head, and the weight steadied me like the beam steadying the roof. "We will come," he said. It was both now and later, both this square of dirt under our sandals and the yard under the manor's wall where the sun would be high in 3 days' time. He had always used words like that, double and exact, and I loved him for it then more than ever. We walked home in a line that could have been procession or retreat. Joan, who had walked with our shadow, Rob did not understand, because the word "its" had not yet been built in his mouth. He skipped and tangled himself, and then, seeing our faces, unskipped and tried to walk like a man in a tale. The geese were hateful when we passed. They hissed as if they had thought we brought bread and then learned we did not. Mother set to mending with a speed that frightened me. My tunic was sound, but she turned the collar anyway and stitched it with a thread, so fine my eyes watered, watching it. "A year is a year," she said once. "Not to me, not to the room, not to anyone living. The Lord remembers such things fairly." Father took the small knife and shaved my belt to make a new hole lower, as if he could keep me fastened here by pulling the leather tight around my middle. He did not look at my face. When he finished, he ran the back of the knife along his palm. Not to cut, to feel its dullness. That night, I did not sleep. And yet, I must have. I dreamed the hall's roof groaned under snow, though. It was summer. I dreamed the steward rolled his parchment tighter and tighter until it became a rope, and the rope became a road, and the road wound itself around our cottage and tugged. I woke with my tongue dry as if I had spoken for hours. The fire had fallen to a red cave, and the smoke lay heavy under the thatch, like a low sky. I counted the rafters, then named them, then gave them faces, so that when I went I would know whose gaze to miss. The one above the door was my grandfather's. The one above the hearth was a cow's eye, kind. The one above my mat was a hound, steady and tired, and good. In the morning, father made me wash as if it were Sunday, and he shaved the down that had begun to roughen my lip with the small knife and the surface of a jar filled with water. The blade was not so sharp that I did not wince. "Hold still," he said, and his voice was a quiet bell. Mother warmed the last clean linen and wrapped it around the bundle she would not let me carry yet. "No more than one bundle," she said, repeating the steward as if repeating might make it a little less true. Joan tucked 2 small things into my palm when no one looked. "Her clay marble for luck," she said without breath, "and a sprig of rosemary because Father Martin had told her its scent." Remembered what the head forgot. I closed my fingers and the rosemary pricked like a green thought. The 3 days became 2 and then 1, and then a morning that was not like any other morning, because every sound wore a name. The bell at Prime was called Depart. The blacksmith's hammer was called Get Up. The dog's bark was called Look Back. I wanted to steal an hour to go to the brook and fit my hands under the stones as I had learned to do, and see if the trout would come to me one more time, but the work of leaving filled the space where that hour would have lived. Father spoke to the oxen as if they were men who could pass a message. Mother laid her palm upon the doorpost and did not move it for the length of a Hail Mary. Rob hid the cat under his shirt and told me I could take it. I lifted the hem and the cat ran, offended. By Tierce the sun had climbed and made its white circle on the manor's wall. The gate stood open. I had never walked through it, not more than a few steps. Never as something the yard would keep. The smell of the place rose like steam, straw, horse piss, baking bread, the sharp sweetness of tar. Voices ran in and out of one another and made their own river. I held my bundle under my arm and the rosemary between my teeth, as if its taste could keep my stomach from turning. Mother took it from my mouth and tucked it behind my ear. "You will come back with your hands more knowing," she said, and then under her breath, "You will come back, you will come back." The words braided themselves, and she set them upon my shoulders like a cloak. We stopped at the gate's shadow. The steward's scar smiled its second smile at us from the centre of the yard, where a knot of other boys already stood, bundles set at their feet like captured birds. I touched my belt and felt the new hole father had made, and the old holes above it, a ladder to which I did not have the choosing of my rung. The yard shimmered in heat. Somewhere a horse stamped, and somewhere a dog laughed in its dog way, and somewhere a cook shouted that lads who walked with mud on their heels would walk back out to clean them with their tongues. Father's hand found my shoulder. He squeezed once. I felt the story tip toward the sentence that would carry it forward. My name on the steward's lips, the roll call, the crossing into the light. My throat worked as if learning a new prayer. The steward raised his parchment. "Attend," he called, and the yard's noises gathered themselves into a hush with edges. "All lads bound to the Lord's household, stand before me. When I speak your name, answer, and come. If your fathers and mothers have words, they may keep them for the moment when my hand falls and not before." His hand lifted. The shadow of it touched my cheek, and then he began to read. The parchment crinkled like dry leaves as the steward unrolled it, his scar pulling with the curve of his mouth. He stood in the heat of the manor yard, sunlight striking the steel of his belt buckle and the dull sheen of his boots. Around him, the air trembled with dust and horseflies. The parchment itself seemed to breathe, swollen with the weight of names it carried. Each name was a stone, and each stone was about to be laid upon a boy's shoulders. I stood among them, bundle pressed to my chest, the sprig of rosemary tickling my ear. Father's hand still lingered at my shoulder, though I felt it slipping, not from his grip, but from the way time itself pulled me forward. Mother was a step behind, veil drawn low, lips moving in a prayer she did not say aloud. Joan stood near her, her eyes wide and shining, and Rob clung to her skirt like a shadow. "Oswin, son of Osbert," the steward called first. A boy stepped forward, face pale but chin raised, his father urging him on with a hand that trembled, though his words were firm. The steward nodded once, a mark upon his tally. Oswin moved to stand with the other boys, his bundle at his feet. Will of Roger, Stephen of Thomas, Henry, son of Matilda the widow. The names fell like stones into water, each making ripples that touched us all. Mothers wept quietly, fathers cleared their throats and stood straighter, as if posture could keep grief at bay. One boy stumbled as he walked forward, knees knocking together, and the steward's mouth twitched. But he did not laugh. None of us laughed. My own name had not yet come, but I felt it hanging in the air like a hawk circling. Each time the steward paused, I thought it would swoop, claws first. I held my breath so tightly that my ribs ached. The rosemary behind my ear grew sharp in its scent, as though it too had tensed. Then the pause came. The steward's eyes lifted from the parchment, and they found Father. His gaze lingered for a heartbeat too long, as if reading something in the lines of his face, or in mine, where I stood beneath his hand. And then his voice came. Son of, my name, my father's, spoken together, bound like rope. The world went very still. I felt Father's hand press hard, then release. Mother's breath caught behind me, sharp as a cut. Joan made a sound in her throat, half cry, half swallow, and Rob began to whimper, not knowing why, but knowing enough. I stepped forward. My legs felt carved from oak, heavy and unbending, yet they carried me into the sunlight. The bundle under my arm grew heavier with each step, as if the clothes within had turned to stone. My mouth was dry. The word "here" stuck to my tongue. I managed to speak it, though my voice cracked like a stick underfoot. The steward nodded. Another mark upon the tally. I moved to stand with the others. My bundle set upon the earth at my feet. My hands felt empty without it, though the rosemary still clung behind my ear. From the yard's edge, I felt Father's eyes upon me. They were steady, though his jaw was clenched. Mother's veil stirred in the breeze, but she did not move. I wanted to run to her, to bury my face in her apron and breathe in the flower and smoke and safety of her. Instead, I stood straight as the other boys did, as we were expected to. One by one, more names were called. The line grew longer. Some boys looked proud, some terrified, some blank as clay yet unshaped. I watched their faces and wondered which one mine resembled. When the last name was read, the steward rolled the parchment once more and tucked it into his satchel. "These are the youths of Sir Hugh's manor for this year," he declared. "They will serve with obedience, they will labour with strength, and they will remember that their honour is their lord's honour. So let it be, so let it be," Walter the Reeve echoed, his tally stick tapping once against his palm. A murmur rose, low and uneasy. Parents stepped forward, pressing last words, last touches, into their sons. A hand against a cheek, a whispered prayer, a hurried sign of the cross. I felt movement behind me, and then Mother was there, though she should not have been. She reached past the steward, past Walter, and placed her hand against my face. Her palm was warm, her fingers trembling. "Keep your head bowed when you must," she whispered, "and lift it only when it is safe. Remember the smell of home. Remember us." She pulled back before the steward could scold. Her veil slipped, and for an instant I saw her eyes bare, fierce and wet. That sight burned itself into me deeper than any brand. The horn blew then, a short, sharp call. From the gate came men with ropes of leather and wooden staffs, not cruelly held but firmly. They beckoned us forward, the line of chosen boys. We moved like a herd, slow, uncertain, bundles clutched tight. The dust rose around our feet, and the yard shimmered in the sun. I glanced back once. Father stood with his arms folded, his face a mask carved from the same oak as the hall beams. Yet I saw the twitch of his jaw, the way his throat worked. Mother's hands were pressed together, white at the knuckles. Joan held Rob against her, his face buried in her side, his sobs muffled by her wool. The gate swallowed me. The world of the village, muddy lanes, smoke-stained cottages, the bell tower fell away behind stone walls. Ahead lay the manor's heart, stables that stank of dung and horse sweat, kitchens that bellowed steam and clatter, kennels alive with barking, and above it all, the hall itself, its roof patched with new timber, its walls watching us with shadowed windows. We were led across the yard, our steps scattering chickens, our eyes caught by every strange sight. I smelled meat roasting, richer than anything I had known. I heard the clang of iron from the smithy, sharper than the village hammer. I felt the press of the wall at my back, though it was not there, only the weight of leaving. "Here is where you will sleep," one of the men said. pointing to a low building near the kitchens. "And here is where you will rise. When the bell rings, you move. When you are called, you answer. You are not boys here, you are hands." The word struck me. Hands. Not sons, not brothers, not children. Hands. That night, lying on a straw pallet among strangers, I closed my eyes and tried to summon the smell of home, smoke, damp wool, bread crust. I whispered Joan's marble into my palm, though I dared not take it out, lest someone see and mock. The rosemary still clung behind my ear, faint now, but there. I thought of father's hand on my shoulder, of mother's palm against my cheek, of Rob's sob muffled in wool. I thought of the geese hissing, the mud clutching my toes, the bell tolling once into silence. Childhood had ended not with a cry, but with the roll of parchment and the stroke of a tally stick, and I knew then that I had stepped into a story that was no longer my own. The first night in the manor yard was louder than any night I had known. The kitchens thundered with pots and pans even after darkness fell. Dogs barked and whined as if their dreams had teeth, and the horses stamped and snorted as though they too were restless under their thatch. We boys lay in a row on straw pallets above the kitchens, the air heavy with smoke and the scent of grease. The heat rose through the floor and clung to us, sticky as resin. I did not sleep, not truly. My eyes closed, but every sound was a finger tapping me awake. One boy sobbed quietly into his sleeve, another muttered a prayer until the words tangled, another turned again and again until the straw creaked like branches in wind. I lay still, my bundle tucked beneath my head, Joan's marble pressed into my palm, the sprig of rosemary still behind my ear, though it had begun to wilt. I breathed its faint sharpness and told myself I still belonged to something beyond these walls. Morning came too soon. The bell in the manor yard rang, not with the slow weight of the church bell at home, but with a brisk, sharp note, as if it mocked us for lying down at all. We were shaken awake by a man with a staff, his boots thudding across the floor. "Up, hands," he barked. "The Lord's house does not wait for your dreams." Hands. The word again? It struck me with the same blunt force as the day before. My body obeyed before my mind could argue, rising, fumbling with my tunic, tying the cord at my waist. We filed down into the yard where the morning air was sharp and smelled of dung, wood smoke and bread baking. Tasks were given quickly, like blows. Some were sent to the stables to muck and feed, others to the kennels, to haul water for the dogs. I was sent to the kitchens with 3 others. The door was already wide, steam pouring out as though the building itself breathed. Inside, it was a world of fire and iron and shouting. Pans clattered, spits turned, knives chopped, voices barked orders. The heat licked my skin, sweat breaking before I had lifted a hand. A woman with arms like oak branches thrust a bucket at me. "Water, boy, quick," she snapped. I stumbled toward the well, filled it, staggered back, and before I could catch breath, she ordered me again. "Firewood now. Move." Her eyes flicked over me once, sharp as a hawk's, and then she looked past me as though I were part of the furniture. I obeyed. That was the rhythm of the day. Obey, fetch, carry, hurry. My back ached, my arms trembled, my feet blistered in shoes too stiff. Yet in the cracks between shouts and clatter, I caught smells that stole my hunger. Roasting meat, thick stews, honey dripping onto bread. I was told to scrape pots clean, and I licked my fingers once when no one looked, tasting grease richer than any meal at home. It burned my tongue with salt and fat, and I thought of my family eating coarse bread and beans, their bellies never full, and the taste turned heavy in my mouth. Days blurred, the sun rose, the bell rang, the work began. Nights fell, the pallets creaked, sleep came and went like a thief. Some boys grew proud, boasting of how fast they could carry a horse or lift a bucket. Others grew silent, eyes blank, moving as commanded, but no more. I hovered between, neither proud nor broken, only weary. Yet there were moments of strange beauty. Once, sent to fetch water at dawn, I saw the sun rise behind the hall, painting the sky in streaks of fire. The dew on the grass turned to silver, and for a heartbeat I forgot the weight on my shoulders. Another time, passing the stables, a foal nuzzled my hand, its breath soft and warm, and it looked at me with eyes wide and dark, innocent as Rob's. I nearly wept then, though I did not know why. We boys were not entirely without kindness. An older lad, Simon, who had been in the manor a year already, showed me how to keep my hands from blistering when carrying buckets. "Wet the rope before you grip," he whispered, grinning. "They'll never tell you that." Another, Matthew, slipped me a crust of bread when I faltered at the firewood pile. "Eat," he muttered, "else you'll fall, and they'll beat you for falling." Such crumbs of mercy were the threads that held me together. But at night, when I lay in the straw, the homesickness returned. I saw our cottage in my mind, the smoke curling from the roof, the cat padding across the beams, the way Father's cough turned into a laugh when he wished it to. I heard Mother's humming, Joan's soft stories, Rob's crowing like a rooster. I smelled damp earth, cabbage stew, wood smoke, and then I opened my eyes and saw only rafters dark with soot, boys turning in their sleep, and the faint glow of embers through the floor. Time passed in strange ways. Days felt endless, yet weeks slipped by unnoticed. I grew stronger, my arms carried more, my back bent less. I learned to move quickly without thinking, to read a shout before it landed, to vanish when tempers flared. My hands grew calloused, my skin browned by sun and fire. I was no longer only a boy. I was becoming the hands they wanted. Still, the village lived in me. On Sundays, when Father Martin came to the manor chapel, I knelt and whispered prayers in Latin I barely understood, and I asked God to carry my words back to our cottage. Perhaps he did. For sometimes in dreams, I felt as though Mother's hand touched my cheek again, or Father's weight steadied my shoulder, or Joan's marble rolled in my palm with a warmth no clay should have. The year stretched before me, long as the road I had left behind, yet I began to see it not only as a sentence, but as a bridge. A year was a long time, yes, but not forever. The seasons would turn, the hall's roof would be mended, the Lord's sun knighted, the levies paid, and perhaps then I would walk back through the gate, bundle lighter, hands rougher, heart heavier, but still my own. I thought often of the last image of home, Father standing straight though his jaw twitched, Mother's veil slipping to show her fierce eyes, Joan holding Rob while he wept. That memory was a flame I carried. It burned low some days, higher others, but it never went out. One evening, after the day's work was done, I climbed to the loft and looked out through a crack in the wall. The fields stretched beyond, golden in the sunset. The same fields that fed my village, the same soil my father's hands turned. I could not see our cottage, but I knew it was there, smoke curling into the sky, waiting. A lump rose in my throat, but I did not cry. Instead, I whispered to the wind, "I will come back." The wind carried my words away, perhaps to the hedges, perhaps to the bell tower, perhaps to my mother's ear as she stirred the pot. Childhood had ended in the yard with the roll of parchment and the stroke of a tally stick. Yet something new had begun too, a knowledge that life was not only mud and geese and games, but also service and loss and strength found in small mercies. I was no longer only a boy of the village, I was a hand in the Lord's manor, a servant of another's will, but beneath it all I was still myself, and one day when the year had turned, I would walk home. I would set down my bundle in the yard, and the geese would hiss, and the mud would clutch my toes, and I would breathe the smoke of our hearth again. Until then, I carried them within me, each step, each breath, each heartbeat. That was the shape of my childhood. Brief as dawn, bright as flame, ended too soon, yet leaving embers that glowed in the dark. And even now, when I close my eyes, I see my mother's hand against my cheek, hear my father's steady breath, feel the weight of the rosemary behind my ear, and I know, though childhood is gone, its memory walks with me still, as constant as the toll of the bell. You've been listening to Lost Sapien. If you wish to return to these quiet corners of history, subscribing will keep the path open.